Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back in once again to the Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur TV show. I'm your host, Queen Ahmadiyyah Shakur. All right, so let's get into it. So, Kobe Bryant's wife, Vanessa, has received a $15 million settlement because of those leaked photos of his dead body, along with her 13-year-old daughter, Gianna's body. And then also, there was a man by the name of Chris Chester, whose wife Sarah and his daughter Peyton were also killed in the crash, and their photos were leaked as well. And so they received $15 million. And this is also nefarious because what kind of low down, sick, demented person goes around showing off pictures of dead people? I mean, not even giving a care in the world about the grieving family members, right? And so, anyway, this is all so crazy. Um, so they go on to say, the thing I found interesting about this was that Sheriff Alex Villanueva, yeah, the nefarious sheriff that I talk about often because he's the one who has gangs within his department that he says that he can't do anything about because, after all, he says he can't stop people from joining cliques and getting inked. Okay, so pay attention. But I find it interesting that he had the nerve to say that since there's been Polaroids, officers have always taken photos of dead bodies, and then they keep like a some type of booklet or pamphlet where they store these things. Okay. And so here's the thing though. We know that they collect photos. We know that crime scene investigators have to come in and photograph everything as they collect evidence. This is all part of the policy. We know and understand that. But what they don't have to do, nor should they ever be going around showing the pictures that they have taken of dead corpses to other people just all willy-nilly. And in fact, not only showing it to people, but distributing these things to people. That's just also disrespectful. So anyway, they say the jury's decision, which ended a federal civil trial that lasted nearly 2 weeks, was an uncommonly high-profile rebuke of two colossal and insular agencies, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles County Fire Department. Okay, both of these were involved in it. And so they say Ms. Bryant testified in court that just days after the emotional public memorial for her husband of almost 2 decades, she was told by Los Angeles Times, by a report that came out from them, that one of the deputies, Joey Cruz, that's his name, had shown photos to a bartender and another bar patron. That's what it said in the complaint. Now he's going around, he took these pictures and he's going around showing them to people at a bar. She said that she wanted to scream. She said, I wanted to just run down the block and scream, but I couldn't escape. I couldn't escape my body. So another woman who's a relative of some of the crash victims testified that a fire department official showed off some of the photos at a gala where communication staff was receiving an award. She later complained about this to the fire department. So in the suit, Ms. Bryant accused the county of negligence and of violating her constitutional right to privacy. Her attorneys argued that orders from the fire department and the sheriff's department officials to delete the images after inquiries begun mounted to the destruction of evidence and an attempted cover-up, honey. So they went out here and did all this, then tried to hide the evidence, okay? Tried to delete it off their computers and all that. Now, Ms. Bryant and Mr. Chester sought damages for emotional distress brought on by worrying that the pictures could resurface publicly or could surface publicly on the internet at any given time. The attorneys for the county acknowledged that the photos were taken and were shared, but they argued that the effort to delete them was thorough enough to keep the photos from appearing for at least the last 2.5 years. And therefore, the photos had not been made public or publicly disseminated, they say. The photographs were not introduced as evidence at the trial either. One of the attorneys says to claim privacy and then put all of these details in public, it defies logic. So they're not supposed to complain about their privacy being infringed on, because if they do complain, they have to do that publicly and then talk publicly about the photos that were supposed to be kept private. So that makes no sense to them. Please tell me how that makes a bit of sense, okay? So anyway, the county's attorneys argued that although some county policies were violated, the plaintiff's constitutional rights were not. And they said that police officers, firefighters, and other emergency responders need the flexibility to document accident scenes before federal investigators or coroner's officials arrive. And so that's why they take the photographs, and that was absolutely justified. Well, no one's arguing that they weren't justified in taking the photos. I think the problem lies in the fact that they distributed the photos, shared the photos with other people, let other people view these photos, and other people had these photos in their possession. So that's clearly an issue. Now, the trial was in some ways a typical Los Angeles celebrity legal spectacle. Miss Bryant arrived each day, and then they go on to talk about how she came each day, in a cube, gleaming in the cube-shaped federal courthouse in downtown LA, all dressed in, coming in a black sport utility vehicle, walking briskly and dressed so fashionably. What does that have to do with anything? I'm sorry. That's why it was a spectacle. At the end of the day, they wouldn't have to worry about any of that had they not had these unprofessional people going around showing off pictures of dead corpses. Like, what kind of sick-minded individual does that? That's all I'd like to know. But they're worried about what she wore to the courthouse. Pay attention. So anyway, they played a video of Sheriff Alex Villanueva talking about how since the invention of the Polaroid, law enforcement officers have been creating a so-called death book. They've created numerous of these so-called death books where they document the bodies they'd seen in their course of work. This is all so sick. Why do they need to keep these things? Why do they want to continuously look at it? But you see, I'm not surprised because I have heard from a friend years ago that they had another friend who was in fact a police officer, and this person was walking around with a picture of a decayed corpse. That's all so sick. I mean, these are the people that are patrolling the streets, walking around carrying pictures of decomposing bodies and then showing them off to people. But, at the end of the day, I guess we shouldn't be surprised because this country has a nefarious history of doing these things. I mean, we can still today see pictures of our ancestors who were lynched so long ago. And the reason we have these photographs still to this day is because, quite frankly, some of their ancestors took them as they were killing and lynching these people. So there's been some kind of macabre sickness going on in this country for decades. I'm sorry, make that centuries. So anyway, they say the agencies had no explicit policies in force that would bar officers from making images of or from taking images of human remains. So the practice was allowed to continue essentially unchecked until citizens spoke up. Now, the agency's internal efforts to investigate what had happened in the Bryant case were sloppy and incomplete. That's what Vanessa's attorney said. Mr. Villanueva, who took the witness stand just after Ms. Bryant testified that he had offered amnesty to deputies for coming forward with the images and then deleting them. So they said in closing arguments, Craig Lavoy, who represented Ms. Bryant, showed the jury a flow chart of how the photographs had spread. There were question marks on the chart of for people who, according to the witness testimony or official reports, had received the images, but whose electronic devices were never searched. So that means some people receive those images and they likely still have them. And so just because they haven't surfaced in the past 2.5 years doesn't mean that they won't or can't sometime in the future. So he says, if I asked all 9 of you to give a percentage chance these photos would end up online, I'd get 9 different answers. This is what Mr. Lavoie said. But none of them would be 0. And when it's your husband, your child, you don't get the luxury of cold percentages. Now, Jerry Jackson, Mr. Chester's attorney, asked the jury to consider awarding a total as much as $75 million to the plaintiffs, $2.5 million each for the past suffering, $2.5 million each for the past suffering, plus about $1 million for each year of their remaining life expectancy, a formula that would add up to $30 million for Mr. Chester and $40 million for Ms. Bryant. So He asked the jury to divide the burden of paying the damages evenly between the sheriffs and the fire departments, because both are funded by the Los Angeles County taxpayers. Now, in their closing arguments, attorneys for the county said that ultimately the case was about photographs that almost no one had seen. Well, maybe almost no one has seen them, but there's no guarantee that no one ever will, because there are people who still have these on their computers, in their cell phones, things like that, and none of those devices were checked. And so, how do we know, and how do they know what's ever going to become of them? Now, the jury disagreed, finding that the failure of both agencies to train employees about the right to privacy amounted to the constitutional violation. They also found that the sheriff's department's practice of taking and sharing photos of human remains violated Ms. Bryant's and Mr. Chester's constitutional rights. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. So, you know what? Like I said, this is also deplorable that people would do things like this. They don't care about the grieving family, the loss that they have just suffered. They don't care about the humiliation, the embarrassment, and disrespecting the dead. They don't care about any of that. And I would venture to guess that some of these people who shared those photos actually sold them. I'm quite sure some of them actually sold these pictures. This is just all so sad, including nefarious. And they got the money, and that's absolutely what they deserve. Because here's the thing. Aside from them getting money, the people who shared those photos, I think there should have been some type of criminal charges for that. I absolutely do. They should have locked them up for doing something like that. It's all so ridiculous, honey. And you know, for the sheriff to sit there and say that they've been collecting these death books, acquiring death books over the past years, and nobody said anything until people started complaining. Why didn't the sheriff ever complain? He didn't think that was crazy. Anyway, make it all make sense, because I clearly cannot. So with that all being said, everyone please like and share. Drop me a comment to let me know what you think about this foolishness. Okay, until next time, beloveds, I will talk to you all again soon. Peace.